The DJI R3 is a very versatile drone with an array of functionalities, with a game-changing feature compared to the Mini 3 Pro, the dual lens system. In this video I will concentrate on the photography side and walk you through all the settings and features, including several interesting new ones. I will keep things easy for beginners, but experienced users will also find several useful tips and tricks. I will not cover every single settings, to focus only on the most useful ones. There are three main locations where we can control the behavior of the R3 for still images. In the settings through the icon with three dots at the top right of the screen, in the exposure window at the bottom right, and in the main photo-video menu next to the shutter. Let's start with the settings. The menu is context sensitive, in other words, the settings are not the same in video or in photo mode. So we choose photo in the photo-video menu, and then tap on the three dots on the top right to access the settings, and then go to the camera tab. As you can see now, the menu relates to photo. The first choice is the file format with options for RAW, JPEG or both formats. I normally use only RAW images, but I must admit that the JPEG file in the R3 are excellent, and this is good news for users who need to quickly post their masterpieces on social media. Then we have the aspect ratio. If we select 4:3, we get the full resolution of the sensor, 4032 by 3024, slightly more than 12 megapixels. If we choose 16:9, we get a version cropped to a height of 2268 pixels, which fits traditional 4K landscape video format. I always choose 4:3, as it gives more option for reframing or cropping to different formats. Then there is a choice for resolution between the true 12 megapixel photo resolution of the camera and the so-called 48 megapixel. The 1/1.3 inches sensor of the R3 is a Bayer-Quide type, capable of splitting each pixel into 4 smaller ones, therefore creating a sort of 48 megapixel mode. However, the size of the resulting pixels is very small, with limited capability of gathering light. In easy light conditions, images taken in the 48 megapixel mode have just a touch of extra detail and give better results in larger print. But in high dynamic range or in low light, the results are sometimes a bit disappointing, and this is not surprising, due to the small size of each pixel. This mode has some benefits, and it works much better in the R3 compared to the first firmware version of the Mini 3 Pro. But it has to be used only on certain light conditions, and it is still a work in progress. To say that R3 has a photo resolution of 48 megapixels is misleading. Then we have a switch to toggle the histogram on and off. I keep it always on, as the histogram is the main tool I use for exposing. I make sure that there is some space between the last bar to the right and the right edge to avoid overexposing. Picking level is a tool for focusing. It outlines in red the element in focus, but only when using manual focus. It comes with 3 strength level. I only use it when focusing manually on a subject close to the camera. On all other occasions I leave it off, as I find it distracting. The next option of exposure warning is another tool for exposure. It overlays white stripes on the overexposed area. I never use it, as I find it really distracting. Then we have the possibility to overlay grid lines. I like the one in the middle to apply the rule of thirds. When taking photos with drones, we often have the horizon line in the frame. Rather than having it in the middle, it is more interesting to divide the scene into thirds and have it either on the higher or in the lower third. On other occasions, especially for top-down shots, we might want a symmetric framing, in which case the same overlay helps positioning the subject. The function style for sharpness and noise reduction that is on the Mini 3 Pro is not available at the moment on the Air 3. Further down, the white balance can be set to auto or manual. I suggest always using manual. With Air 3 I prefer a setting around 5700 kelvins. Finally, we can select the storage location, either an SD card or the internal 8GB memory, and we can format the SD card. Let's move to the Control tab. At the top we can choose the unit, metric in meters, metric in kilometers, and imperial. In gimbal mode we have a choice between follow and FPV mode. It is meant mostly for video and we generally keep it on follow. If we switch to FPV, the aircraft will lean sideways while turning, like a real plane. This gives us the chance for some unusual creative shots. Further down we have Gimbal Calibration. Here we can automatically calibrate it if we are prompted by the app, but we can also access manual if we have the horizon slightly slanted, as here we can fine-tune it. Let's now move to the exposure settings located in the lower part of the screen, to the right. In auto mode the exposure is set by the software. We can only access the EV for exposure value to adjust the overall luminosity. I find that the app has a slight tendency to overexpose, therefore I prefer to set the value at -0.3 or -0.7. When the camera moves, the exposure values are modified to maintain a constant luminosity, but the individual values for ISO and shutter speed are not shown. This is one of the reasons why I always suggest using manual exposure, as we want to be able to control these values. By tapping on the icon to the right, we access manual mode, labeled Pro. Then, tapping on the area of the values slightly to the left, we access the window for exposure. In photography, there are three parameters for exposure: ISO, aperture and shutter speed. But with Air 3, like with many other prosumer drones, the aperture is fixed. Therefore, we only have two values to deal with. We can set the values for ISO and shutter speed independently. The value at the bottom cannot be modified. It displays the luminosity resulting from the values chosen above, compared to the optimal exposure computed by the software. Again, I prefer to see a slightly negative value. In this window there are two auto buttons for ISO and shutter speed. It is possible to set one of the two values, either ISO or shutter speed, as auto. Let's say we want a fixed value for ISO, 100, to get the best possible quality. In this case we set ISO to 100 and shutter speed to auto. When the luminosity varies, only the value for shutter speed changes to maintain the correct luminosity, leaving the ISO at 100. Notice that the value has now turned into EV for exposure value and it can be modified. On other occasions we might want a constant value for shutter speed. Let's say we want a long exposure to shoot moving subject with some motion blur. So we select the desired value for shutter speed and set the ISO to auto, and this time as the luminosity increases or decreases, only the ISO varies. We can also choose to put both values to auto. It is very much like using auto exposure, but there are some advantages compared to the traditional auto mode. In auto mode we have no indication on the individual value for ISO and shutter speed, while using this method we can see both. By tapping on the icon on the lower left we access another window for the white balance, the file format, the aspect ratio, the resolution and the storage location. We already seen how this functionality work, as they are also available in the settings. Let's move to the photo-video menu above the shutter. After the single shot we can choose the automatic exposure bracketing with a choice of 3 or 5 photos at an interval of 0.7 stops. When 40 megapixel mode is selected, AEB will only take 3 photos. It is a feature that I use all the time, for two reasons: to be sure to have at least one image exposed perfectly. Also, it is possible to merge the 5 images to HDR using programs like Lightroom or Luminal Neo to obtain better results compared to a single one in certain light conditions. especially in high dynamic range situations. You will find info about Luminar Neo, the program I use for photo editing, in the description below. You can watch the video about it by clicking on the link on the screen. Then we have burst with a choice of 3, 5 or 7 shots in 12 megapixel and 3 shots in 48 megapixel mode, useful when shooting action. Finally, timed shots take several images at a specific interval in seconds. In the Mini 3 Pro, the 48 megapixel mode is found in this menu, but in Air 3 has been moved to the camera tab of the settings. To the left of the shutter there are 2 buttons to select one of the 2 lenses, 1x from the wide angle and 3x for the telephoto lens. Note that there is no progressive zoom between the 2 focal lengths. This feature is only available for video. Further down there is a button to toggle between auto and manual focus. In manual mode we focus by dragging the parameter bar up and down. Click on this link to watch my video about photography with the Air 3. And don't forget to click on the like button if you find this video interesting. Thank you.